listen to the Holy Scriptures. We listen to all of the philosophers, and they've made tremendous contribution in terms of childhood development. I think Erickson certainly has made in his schema. Freud has made some contribution, and many other, Madler and others, Piaget, and all of those have made significant contribution. But I think we have to begin when we start having these kinds of discussion to look at the Holy Scriptures. So let me just use a couple of verses as we begin here tonight. And one of the verse, of course, is found in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6. And this is a very familiar passage, of course, and we know it by heart. It says, train up the child in the way that he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And that's a biblical statement. And it is simply saying that if parents are successful in imparting their value, their belief system to their children, that when they get older, obviously that those values will continue to be a part of their personality. So what we're really talking about here, we're talking about deeply embedded principles and values, and that are going to be the factors, the elements that actually shape the person's character and the person's personality. And so we have to begin to look at some of these passages. But I want to emphasize here, and as we go along, we need to begin to understand it's not just about you doing the verbal, teaching, because as I said earlier before, that children ultimately will pick and choose those teachings or modeling or examples that are attracted to them. And that's certainly what they're going to internalize. But in this particular passage, it says that you ought to train. And so I think we can have some discussion. And some of you might be asking, what does it mean to train? Are we talking about a teacher-student kind of relationship? Is that what he's talking about? How do we go about training? And I think that the idea here of training go beyond that whole notion of student teacher-student relationship. It's talking about the modeling of. It's talking about discipline. It talks about monitoring. It talks about being there on a regular basis to begin to help this youngster to begin to shape in terms of the values that you would like for them to have. And then the next verse that I want to use is in Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7. And in that particular verse, it says, as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Of course, there's a lot of debate on this issue in terms of the behaviorists. Of course, their slant on some of this is that if you, in terms of deciding what you want and who you're going to become, has to do with your behavior. In other words, if you behave a certain way, you will come to believe it. And that's the behaviorist approach to things. Obviously, the cognitive approach to that, the cognitive psychologists reverse that. They say, look, if you want to have good behavior, you have to start with your belief. So belief comes first, and then you have the behavior that follows. Now, the behaviorists reverse that. They say, look, the behavior comes first, and then you will come to believe it. If you act like it, you will come to believe it. So that's kind of where those two schools of thought sort of hit heads and come together. But I think tonight we have to ask, what is the biblical perspective on this? What is Paul's theology on this? What is James' theology on this? What is Jesus's theology on that? What exactly is Jesus saying? If you really want to develop a healthy, vibrant personality, is it that you go with the belief or you go with the behavior? What is Jesus's model on this whole thing? And so, or what is Paul's idea on this? What is James' idea on this? What is your idea on this? What do you believe? Do you believe that you are as you behave, or do you believe it's about your thinking? So all of that, we can have some discussions about that, and maybe on those of you on the Facebook page could certainly have some interaction about that. Which comes first? Which is more important? Is it that you will act a certain way because you want to believe something, or is it that you begin to believe, and that belief will then shape, the way you behave? And there's, like I said, there are two schools of thoughts on that, but it also have an impact in terms of counseling and therapy, because you have to have a belief. What do you really believe? In terms of getting people to be transformed, and especially if you're talking about, working with adolescents, whether it be in the school system and on the local congregation, wherever it is, you've got to have some sort of a belief that you believe in, that you're going to be able to help others and share with them. So that's the second passage, which says in Proverbs, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. In this passage, though, this is more of a cognitive approach here. This is simply saying, if you want your behavior to be a certain way, then you got to change your belief system. You change that, and you're going to get the results over here. And then the next passage that I want to use is found in Timothy. And this is more of an intergenerational kind of an approach to this, which is more of an example kind of a situation, where Paul says of this young man, it says, for I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother, Lois, and your mother, Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. So what Paul is simply saying, that as a result of that socialization, as a result of the way you were raised, I am confident as I look at your grandmother and I see her faith, and I look at your mother, I am concluding that your faith will resembles that. In other words, the same kind of value system that was witnessed in your grandmother and in your mother, because of their interaction and the way that they have raised you. Paul is simply saying, I think I will see the same kind of a faith. And then the last passage that I want to use is in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. It says, you, however, continue in the things you have learned and become convinced of, knowing from whom you have learned them. Verse 15 says, and that from childhood you have known the sacred scriptures, which are able to give you wisdom and leads to salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. So Paul is saying that this young man, Timothy, was exposed at an early age. And I am saying to you that this happens in his home, the way he was raised, and that his grandmother was a woman who believed in the Holy Scriptures, who taught her daughter the Holy Scriptures, and in turn, she was able to have a positive impact on her grandson by the modeling that both of these wonderful women did. Unfortunately, we don't have any reference to the father, so it makes you wonder, what happened here, and that's a whole nother discussion. But that's where I want us to begin with our discussion. And before we get too far, I want to quote some psychologists, some of their comments, and one of them was Baba. In 1955, he, in his research, concluded that the fundamental fact of human existence is man with man. In other words, he is simply saying that it is all about relationship. And so if we're going to move forward as a people, it's going to be in terms of relationship. So when you start talking about the infant, when you start talking about children, you're talking about creating an environment where you can begin to model to them what it truly means to be human, that uniqueness. And that has to be in terms of communication and dialogue, how they interact with each other. So that's important. So humans can only come into being through that creative communication. So if you have a situation, and I think you can sort of envision this, if you have an infant who is left every day in the crib with no human contact, just with a bottle of milk, whatever, when he cries, you can see how this is going to create a situation where this child is going to grow up into an adult with serious impairment, serious difficulties, because we become human, truly human, through that community of interacting and sharing with each other. Because it is there that we, through this interaction, that we discover and we test our powers, we test our knowledge, we heighten our awareness. It is the mirroring from others from those early years where mom and dad mirrors to the child what what life is, and his being. And so from that communication, from that interaction, that is where we begin to feel good about ourselves. That's where, if we want to talk about self-esteem, a sense of value, it is in those early phases where and unfortunately the bulk of this usually be with the mom, because it is the mom who breastfeed, it is the mom who's there from day one, and it is the mom who spend most quality time, at least the first 6 years. It is really the mom who is doing a lot of that work. And so that's where, and we can we can talk at some other time about the sense of identity between male and female, and how we have these two different schemas, as in terms of female definition and a male definition, where the male definition is someone who is tough and rugged and more concrete and more logical. And on the female side of things, someone who is softer, more into relationships and friendships, and kind of interact differently in a softer kind of, it's not uncommon to hear people say, you talk too much, or why can't you be logic, and so we have these definitions. But I'm saying to us that it is the family system that reinforces the idea of maleness and the idea of femaleness. It's the way people are being socialized within that family system that nurtures that. And so, but that, like I said, that's not for our discussion here tonight, but we certainly can discuss that another time. But I want to quote another what Martin Buber had to say. And he says, in terms of quotation, human life touches on absoluteness by virtue of its dialogue character. In other words, our ability to communicate with each other. And so our uniqueness comes through that process of us communicating with each other. It's interesting that John, the apostle, talks a little bit about this when he says, but he used it in terms coming from a negative standpoint. He says, if we confess our faults one with another, we have fellowship. And it would have been nice if we put it from the positive side of that and say that, if we share with each other our joys and our victory, that we certainly will have fellowship with each other. But I think we can conclude that that's also implied in 1 John chapter 1 and verse 7. And like I said, that's more, John sets it within the context of the negative. Like if we in order to have fellowship, we confess our sins with each other, the blood cleanses us, we have fellowship. I would like to reverse that by saying that if we can share our joys and our victory, and if we can laugh together and communicate together in a healthy way, that we will experience the abundance of God's grace. We would experience the joy of what God intends for us to enjoy as we begin to have those positive and healthy moments as we interact with each other. And that is why I think sometimes it is so discouraging when you see within family system, you see such toxic, negative emotions of violence, and even within the local churches themselves, where people don't talk with each other, they gossip, there's this jealousy, there is just bitterness and anger, even within the Christian communities. And that's why you have so many denominations in the first place, that people can't really sit and talk with each other. But I think the same thing is also true within the family system. And if you're honest tonight, and you really look at your own history, your own narrative in your own family system, I think you may have a story to tell tonight. I think you may be able to say, yes, I understand. And I remember what it was like growing up in my family. I remember, that there were more bad times than there were good times. I remember in some cases tonight, there may have been family violence. There may have been neglect. There may have been abandonment. There may have been, physical violence, sexual, whatever it is in some of these families. But also, you may have been in a family where it was a loving place to be, where you felt secure, you felt nurtured. It was being home was a wonderful place to be. And you were happy to be there, happy to experience the love of mom and dad and the grandma and how wonderful it was, being together. And it's a place where now you want to have in your own family to be able to duplicate that. But not many of us have had that kind of a positive experience in our own family system. And so tonight, what I want you to do is to begin to think about, use your own experience and think about the children who may be in homes tonight that they don't have food. They may be home tonight where they don't have some of the basic necessities of life. It may be home tonight where it's a home of violence and brutality and ugliness and just a bad place to be, where children tonight are experiencing what I call near-death experiences because of what's happening in their homes. And so sometimes I think we tend to forget this. And there are even those of us who believe that the school should be able to fix all of this stuff. And to me, it's not something that can happen, because I think the home is where we shaped, children. As a matter of fact, I think the first 6 years are critical. And I think what happens in those first 6 years have a lot to do with, not that I'm talking about determinism. I'm not trying to say tonight that the way you were shaped, you would always be, because I think the gospel talks about the transformation that can certainly happen. So I know Freud and, well, most of the clinicians actually hold to the idea of determinism. And there are those who believe that our psychic development, which we are Freudian, would determine who you are. And therefore, whatever you do now, you're just projecting, your own regression and whatever it is, your own negative stuff onto others. And so there are those who believe that. And there are others who believe that we're nothing more than the product of our environment. In other words, our environment kind of shaped us. And therefore, the die has already been set. And therefore, there's no change there. And of course, there's another third group that says that, we are nothing more than the genetic makeup. The genes is what determines who you're going to be. And there's nothing you can do to change that. You're set in stone, you're fixed, whether it be genetically, whether it be the environment who shaped you, whether it be the intrapsychic kinds of issues, as Freud would talk about, that has shaped you, you can't change. Well, I've got news for you tonight. It says that the grace of God has appeared unto all men, teaching us. And I want to change that word from teaching to empowering us, because it is about God working within us to transform that past life into a healthy, productive, present life. And that's what we need to expose our children to. And that's where I think we need to begin to have those kinds of a discussion about how that we can make those changes. So if you want to talk tonight about how we can be able to be healthy and create a community where we can have our children develop, go from being an infant into a healthy adolescent, we have to begin to be more responsible and to have clearly in our minds a plan, a method, a theory as to how life can be transformed. We have to be able to know that, and then we have to be able to implement that and model that, so that we can watch the growth of our children in a very slow process. And of course, the educational system will enhance that and will help us out with that. But I think when children come back from school, at the end of the day, there has to be a home there to continue that growth process by modeling and disciplining, so that both the school and the home can collaborate together on this youngster, in helping this youngster to grow up in to become a healthy, normal individual. So that's what I want us to focus on here tonight. I believe that man can become whole, not in virtue of a relationship to himself, but rather in virtue of us communicating with each other. Because that's how, think about having an infant raising him or herself. Okay, it's the interaction that actually help to develop this individual. And unfortunately, what I want us to notice, that not all of our children have this opportunity to have such a rich soil, such a rich environment that can continue to help whatever God has deposited in that individual, to harness that, so that this child can move into a healthy adolescent, a healthy individual, and be able to take their rightful place in our society. So man, as Baba, and this is a quotation from Baba again, says, man is unique because he is defined by his relationship with others. And that's a very powerful statement in my mind, that man is unique. Our uniqueness is within that, our ability to find our place in that larger world. But before we can get into the larger world, we have to find ourselves within that nuclear family system. And that's where we learn all the skills that are vital, skills about how to value ourselves, skills about vision and faith in ourselves and others, and being able to learn how to play and how to share and to understand what it truly means to not to breach into other people's rights and so on. All of that happens within the family early. And so as the child becomes an expert within that small nuclear family, that small family, then the same values and the traits that they learn is the same trait that they would take to the early elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, and at the workplace, and finally in their own marriage, in their own relationships. That's where it gets started. But if early here, the damage is done, where a child learns that the only way that they can get what they need is to violate the rights of other siblings in their own household, or where the child may learn that they have no rights at all whatsoever, that they have no security whatsoever, there is no control whatsoever. So if that child begins to internalize those kinds of schemas, then you begin to see down the road a lot of other mental health issues, whether it be depression, anxiety, and in some situation, we have children who are struggling with what I call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Because if you spend your entire, maybe a good 10 years, the first 10 years of your life, in a family system of violence, of nastiness, then what happens is, especially if there's physical domestic violence in that situation, and you spend the first 10 years internalizing that, then you develop into what we sometimes call complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where it is not just an incident, such as in the case of on a military situation where you witness the death of someone or an accident in the street, but a whole series, a whole lifetime of events, of traumatic events, that now you have learned over time how to deal with that. And part of that is through suppression. It doesn't exist. Then if that doesn't exist, then you don't exist as a person. And so that's where you start having a lot of the mental health issues, such as depression and anxiety. And this can even escalate to other psychotic kinds of things, where people begin to hear voices. As a matter of fact, I was speaking with just someone today that, he is in such a traumatic situation that now he's actually hearing voices. And of course, it's horrific for this individual. And so, but what's happening here is that all of his internal strengths are broken down, basically. And so his world is where he feels that he has no control whatsoever. And now his thoughts are racing, and not only are they racing, and of course they had to change his meds because he was on antidepressant SSRI drug, which was designed to treat depression. And for whatever reason, he was misdiagnosed, and because he has a bipolar disorder. Now when he goes manic on this, takes the depressant drug, he just sends it further into the ceiling. And when you get that racy and that elevated, then you begin to hear things. You begin to hear voices, basically. So, of course, the intervention, of course, was to provide a mood stabilizer and begin to add some other things there. So, what I'm saying to us is that when you peel back the life of this individual, you're going to see where the trauma started, way in childhood. The abuse started there, and it continues. And for sometimes you as a clinician, you say this person is just so damaged. It's just so, and we begin to feel, because what that does, it transfers to the clinician a sense of hopelessness. And once you begin to feel hopeless, then it becomes a severe problem, because then you have to ask yourself, what is the meaning of Jesus saying on the cross, it is finished? What is the meaning what Jesus said, you need to be born again? Can we restart this thing? And that's why I'm saying, as parents, we need to have a ritual. And maybe that's not a good word to say we need to have a ritual. We need to have a theory about change. How can people change? How can I help my child to be the very best? What is the theory? What is the belief system that you have, other than just floating in the air, basically? And so now we become so preoccupied with paying the rent and the light bill and all of this stuff, and we really and so we kind of just look off when the child is hungry and when the child is wet, but that's all we know and that's all we do. And I'm saying to us, we need to have a clear philosophy or ritual as to what it takes to raise a healthy child. And that's why Manoah, remember in Judges, said to the angel, you need to come back and tell us how to raise this child. What is it that we need to do to create this child, in the terms of Samson, into a healthy individual? And I think parents need to have a clear sense as to what that theory is. What is that ritual? What is that thing that you're using every day to measure that you're bringing to help this child to begin to have a healthy personality, to begin to feel good about him or herself, and to be able to respect self, to have faith in self, to respect everybody in the home, and to begin to develop expectation, and to be able to nurture their motivation so that they can have ambition, and so that they can begin to feel and begin to have some sense of confidence. I mean, that's what self-efficacy is to have some control about your life. And we have to start early so that kids can feel that they can go to the first grade and begin to have some sense that they can manage that, they can master that. But I think that sense of mastering has to come early. And I'm talking especially tonight to the younger parents that are maybe listening tonight, who may be going through your first baby, your first child, maybe you're pregnant tonight. And so you have to begin to think about, what is it that you're going to do? What is it? What's the theory? What are your belief system? And sometimes in premarital counseling, that's what I try to get young couples to think about before they begin to think about, child rearing. What's your philosophy? What is your priority? What are some of the things that you're going to be holding on to as a couple that you have some commonality on, that you're agreeing upon, How are you going to raise this child? What's going to be the priority? What will your home look like? What's going to be the emphasis, the priority in terms of raising this particular child? Let me just pay some attention to Samantha says childhood trauma can lead to significant medical issues in adults, including an increased risk of chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, liver disease, and so on, and cancer, and so on. And this is, let me see more, likelihood, the likelihood of these disease and disorder. And so this is exactly, this is true. I mean, this is what happens. And I'm saying to us tonight, we can use our own marker and say, look, I know how I was raised. I know the environment. I was talking to someone not long ago, say, had I had good parents, I would have been the best of the best. I would have been further along, but I didn't have that. And so, but there are children that do have that. And so I think that we have to begin to have those kinds of discussions about what is it, can we change? There are some things that you should have had back then, but you didn't have the parents who can guide you and lead you and nurture you and help you to provide the, there are some environment where parents don't even have the will. And sometimes it's as though they hate their own children in terms of their own motivation, in terms of, providing financial assistance and encouragement and so on and so on. So if you have an environment that is that barren, an environment that lacks some of those basic things, but yet you have children there, then you have to, and some children actually pull, it's like Reagan used to say, pull yourself by your own bootstrap. But how can you expect a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old to pull themselves up on their own bootstrap? No, that's the job of the parents. And sometimes by the mercy of God, some of us survive. We survived, those kinds of experiences. And you have to understand the kind of resilience, and we have to applaud. We really have to applaud those youngsters who have gone through those barren environment, and yet they're able to make something of themselves. They turn out, they're not in jail. They're responsible. They're able to hold on good jobs, and they're very ambitious and motivated in life. And you see this. And I think we have to applaud those individuals who've done those things in order to help themselves, because when you look at the background, they didn't have those kinds of things. So I think that's wonderful. So we have to understand, one of the, schools of psychology, and especially I want to talk a little bit about Sullivan's in terms of his interpersonal theory of psychiatry. He holds the view that our relationship with others and our sense of self is identified by the way we perceive by others and how we perceive or distort others. And that's something that happens very early in life. And he's saying that part of our health, part of our success, part of our being healthy has to do with how early on, how others perceive us, how they mirror to us, our sense of importance. And that sometimes can become clouded to where we begin to distort how we see others, but we also distort how we see ourselves. And so if you think about children who, on one hand, are able to see their colleagues and their peers, with nice clothing, and their parents are there at the school function to support them, and that they've been cared for. But you yourself, on the other side of that, have none of those things. And so what happens, there's a sense of shame you develop quite early. And that sense of shame begins to have a tremendous impact. And when you become good at it, you go through a period, a phase where you begin to deny, because you have to deny. How can you not deny that what you're existing when you know that your parents are considered to be nobody in the community just by virtue they have no jobs, the virtue of the fact that they don't have some of the basic necessities of anything, whatsoever. And so you know that, and here's the thing, here's the sad part, the parents themselves know that they're nobody. Just by virtue, that's why they drink themselves to death. That's why a lot of stuff happens. Okay, that's why they become violent, because they know that they have no value in this community, but the children know that the parents know that they are no value. And you think about children who are raised in that kind of environment, think about the level of shame that happens, and the depression and the anxiety. How do these children survive? And I'm saying, we see them in our streets. These are the kids that are joining gangs. These are the kids that are breaking into homes. These are the kids that are self-destructing themselves in terms of drugs and all the horrible things that are happening. And then we point finger at the government. We say it's the government, and that's unfortunate that we do that. We tend to blame others for our own errors and our own mistakes. And I'm saying to us, even where we see, the escalation of crimes in some of our small islands, it's not that the government has failed. It's the homes that are failing our children. Because if you remember, even before these children got involved in politics or the personality is already laid there in their own homes. And so what I'm saying is, if you want to begin to point finger at the government, maybe you should say, maybe the government should put policies in place so that there'll be more parenting skills, that there'll be more finance monies available for better health care and all of that stuff. And even in the cases where you have better health care, you're still going to have a problem over here in terms of raising these children, because if mom and dad aren't doing what they're supposed to do, it doesn't matter how good the health care is, you're still going to have a lot of problems. And I understand what Samantha is saying in terms of, the consequences of bad behavior would result in a lot of different things that happen. If people are going to deny they're having problems, and the way they're going to compensate that is by drinking and doing all the stuff, and it happens. And so there are going to be serious medical consequences. There are going to be serious medical consequences as a result of all of this as well. So let me just see if there's any comments that I need to. Okay, so Samantha says children thrive with boundaries and routines and restriction, TV and so on. Yes, that, and that's what I'm saying to us, that in the home, children need monitoring and they need discipline, but they also need unconditional love and support. Children need to feel safe in their homes. That's one thing. They need to feel safe. And in order for them to feel safe, they have to feel that their parents also are in control. Because children know when mom and dad aren't in control, when the people keep coming and taking away the stuff, when the children notice that all of your furniture is put out in the street and you're going to be evicted, children know that the parents have failed. And when they know that, and the parents themselves know that they have failed, those things are having tremendous impact on children in terms of their psyche, in terms of their character, their sense of well-being. Children who are raised in these kinds of conditions find it very difficult to maximize their internal strength and power, to be able to step out and risk truly what it means to be creative. So their creativity goes down. And when their creativity, that's why a lot of our kids drop out, especially in the United States, in the 9th grade. And I would suspect that the same thing is true in St. Vincent, that a lot of those kids, drop out very early. And sometimes they drop out simply because they can't compete with other kids, and the shaming process where they can't read and they can't do this. And so they act bad by saying they're not going to school and they drop out. But sometimes they may be dropping out because of their own internal inadequacy, where they feel that the academic demands of them to perform, they know the inside information that they can't. And then the parents are not savvy enough to be able to get a tutor for them and be able to be there with their homework. None of that. So these kids are going home They know that there's no help. And the next day they know what they have to go and face. And what they have to go and face is to be able to compete with their peers in an academic community. And so what do? They turn the table out over so that they can be suspended. And suspension for them is a gift because they want to get out of the competition, get away from the academic community, so they may slug a teacher, they may hit a principal, they may do something, into a fight so they can be suspended. And sometimes when some of these children are suspended, they are on the street because who is the home to provide the supervision in the first place? Because the parents are out somewhere. And sometimes the parents don't even care to begin with. So we have to begin to see that what we're having here are serious problems, because in order to develop healthy personality, a healthy relationship, you got to have a nurturing relationship. And that relationship must begin in the home. And of course, parents, of course, do have an awesome responsibility. And sometimes they're too busy. But then they get home from work, they're tired. But, the homes that are really successful are the ones who have time to do all of those things, and at the same time still have enough time to spend quality time with their children. So we become what we are in order to be able to develop authentic and real relationship with others. And that's where it's at. And some, it's extreme. Sometimes I see a lot of kids with school phobia. And what this is just another nice word of saying they just, being around people it is very painful to be around people, to be around others. And so a lot of these kids, they're bright. Some of these kids are very bright, and they go off to college, and within the first semester, they're back home because they can't deal with, being around other people. And it becomes so traumatic for them. It creates such anxiety in them that they became mentally handicapped. And so they have to come back home and be at home. And it is tragic when you see this human waste. And I'm saying that all of that happened early. And we have to begin to think about how we can develop programs that we can help our children to be healthier and to be secure in who they are. There's a passage of scripture I think that's very important. It says in John 13 and 14, it says, "A new commandment I gave to you, that you should love one another, even as I have loved you." And it says, by doing this, you should, folks will know that you're my disciples. And I want to use this passage, not within the context of the church. I want to use this passage within our homes, that I believe that fathers and mothers are to model this kind of a love to their children, to each other, to their spouse. That if we can create this environment in our home so that folks from the outside can see that this is a model family. This is a family that care for each other as a family, that they love each other unconditionally. But this love, this kind of a love, is a strong love where children are going to be disciplined, where children are going to be monitored, so that if your child decides that he wants to go over to somebody's house to sleep over, you're going to say, I got to go first, and I got to check out these people, and I got to make sure what's going on over there before you can go. I mean, these are things that you're going to have to do as a family, as a couple, if you're going to be able to monitor your children. That is why you have to be involved in the educational system. You need to have a relationship with your child's teacher. You have to be able to talk to the school teacher. You have to be able to be involved in what's happening in the school system, because you're looking out for the best interest of your child, to make sure that there is a relationship, a communication between the teacher who's teaching your child and yourself. You have to be available. And sad, many times, parents are not concerned enough. Teachers are trying to reach out and there's no response. And you wonder what's happening. And so these are things that government can't fix. These are things that we have to, as individuals, must be responsible enough to set our children as a priority. And we want our children to succeed. And we're going to do everything in our power to be able to create a bridge that our children are going to have a reasonable chance of succeeding in terms of what they need to do. And it's not just academics. It's not just about going to Harvard or going to University of West Indies. I'm talking about helping your boys and girls to be healthy, decent human beings. And you notice I'm not even leaning heavily on scriptures or Christianity and Jesus. I'm not even going down that road. Maybe I should. Maybe you thinking I should be going down that road. But I'm saying that we need to begin to look at our family structure, what we do, not what we do in the church, what we're doing at home in our families. What we do on Sunday sometimes is nothing more than a show. That's all it is. It's a shot. Sure, we roll into the church as a sinner, we roll out as a sinner. Nothing ever changes. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what we do in our homes in terms of making our children a priority and making sure that we advocate for them and we do what we need to do in providing a safe, healthy environment for them to grow. So this time flies every time I get going. I'm still in the introductory phase of this whole of this. Can't believe this. I only have 10 minutes left. This is just frustrating for me. So the goal of the family and the local church, I think, is very clear. And part of that goal is to set as a goal that you're going to help your boy and your girl to develop a genuine, healthy, sense of who they are, and so that children can have an open dialogue, and where you can begin to listen to them, what they're saying, what they're feeling, what their day is like, what's their frustration. And sometimes parents feel like, don't talk, listen, just don't talk. Well, if your children don't talk, how are you going to know what they're thinking? How are you going to know what their thoughts are? You have to create that environment where you can have that dialogue with your children and being able to engage them. Because, sometimes parents create by their attitude and their behavior encourages children to be silent. And sometimes the silence may even go over into where your child must now lie to you and become dishonest. And then the child becomes good at being dishonest. And so now their whole personality becomes one of dishonesty. And sometimes the children lie when they don't even have to lie. But lying becomes so deeply ingrained because that's what they learn at home. Because if they were to tell the truth, mom will curse, dad will curse, they may even be hit. And so we have to begin to look at what our goal is. Is our goal to get our children to be silent? Or is our goal to teach our children how to communicate their thoughts in healthy ways? How to communicate their thoughts so that their needs can be met in a healthy way? I was talking to a lady today, and yesterday I had to do something for her, and so today I said, well, what did you do? And she said, well, they were pulling my blood. And this nurse was like going up and down in my arm and just really, in and out of my arm because she was missing the vein. And so I slug her out. It's the hospital. You slug her out. Okay, of course, they press charges, But I'm just saying sometimes we have to begin to teach our children how to have their needs met in healthy ways. And so this whole idea of cultivating silence in your children is dangerous and hazardous, because what that does is that children learn to suck up and to bury and to suppress their thoughts and their feelings, and therefore they begin to come away with the experience that they are not valuable, that their thoughts are not important anymore. And so once children become good at that, then that's where that becomes a source of depression. Because once children begin to feel hopeless, once they begin to feel that their ideas have no meaning within their own family system, then that gets portrayed over into the larger community as well. And so you may have kids who are very bright, but they learn early at home to hide their brightness because somebody's going to yell at them. Somebody's going to say something to them, because if they ever want to question anything, and some of the children like to question, that's part of the adolescence, is identity, the challenge, part of who they are. And sometimes parents, because of their own weak self-structure, ego system, they can't tolerate situations like that. And we see that in the pulpit. We see that among preachers. There's some preachers out there that they're so dysfunctional, such weak ego structure, that you can't challenge them. The moment you say, look, let me, my thoughts, they're ready to disfellowship. They're ready to throw you out of the church, because it's their own dysfunction. And sometimes people get away with that level of dysfunction and pathology where it never gets fixed. And as a result of that, some of these people may even wind up in organizations such as the church and elsewhere as leaders. But they're very dysfunctional individual with a deeply embedded, weak, fragile ego system. And as a result of that, you have to either dance around them or be silent. And sometimes in church, I remember saying, I don't agree, but I just be silent. Where did you learn that? Now, church situations must be an edification where we interact with each other. But the same thing is true. What I'm saying to us is in the family system, we have to teach our children how to interact and how to begin to express their thoughts and their feeling in safe ways. There's a way to do it. And we have to model that, but we have to give them an opportunity so we can guide and lead them as well. So if any, let me see if there's any comments that we need to focus on. Let me see here. I saw a sign last week that said, every home is a school, and we are always teaching and teach carefully. And that's brilliant. And that's what I'm saying here tonight, that the home is where it's done. And some of you tonight, may be getting a second time around, in terms of being a grandparent. Maybe you are now in a position where, as a grandparent, you are the one that is responsible for the nurturing of your grandchild. I'm saying that you can do a great job. And this is what we need to come together to begin to do what God truly wants us to do. So we must first be, but in order for us to be this way, we ourselves must first become autonomous and independent before we can fully engage other people. Because if we don't know who we are, if we're not content with ourself, our own self, our own perception, our own self-esteem, if that is weak and if that is fragile, then it means that our interaction with others are going to be dysfunctional. And certainly we're going to be using more of a projective kind of a situation where we're going to project our stuff onto others and hope that and wanting for them to take ownership for your own personal stuff, and that's very sad when that happens. And we see it happen all the time. And so we have to begin to understand how important it is that we have to learn how to set boundaries. And the way you set those boundaries is that you have to teach your children early at home where the boundaries are, okay? Because if children don't know that, then they're going to have problems. As a matter of fact, you see it in the elementary. As soon as they enter school, they begin to think that, they're at home, they can do whatever they want, take whatever they want and say whatever they want. That's because they never learn how to understand their boundaries. And so we have too many people are stepping outside of that because they don't have the social skills to begin to respect themselves and to respect others as well. And so there are no boundaries. And the same thing is true at home, because domestic violence is about no boundaries, isn't it? Incest and all of that stuff that's happening in our homes because there are no boundaries. And abuse, physical abuse, and all of that stuff tantamount to there are no boundaries. So it's the baddest, whoever is the baddest, that's who gets whatever. It gets the nurturing, gets the attention. And so if our children begin to learn that, then that gets played out within our school system as well, which becomes very problematic. So let me just kind of wind this portion down by using a passage of scripture. and it's in First Peter chapter 1, verses 22 and verse 23. It says, since you have in obedience to the truth, purify for yourself, your soul, for a sincere love of the brethren. In other words, part of Christianity is the purifying of that. So now what happens is you can now have a genuine love for other human beings. And that's what I'm talking about, that we can always, the transformation where we can begin to be healthy, develop healthy. And that is why it is so shocking when you find in some of these so-called churches where you find, the sexual abuse of children, you find the fighting of each other, the backbiting, the nastiness, even in the United States here, you see where, the level of racism still exists in church. I'm not talking in the world, in the community. I'm talking in the churches where you have black churches and white churches. And I mean, it goes on, and yet Jesus said it's finished, and he's broken on the middle wall of petition, So here, Peter is talking to us about a purifying love, a love that will accept all people, a love where mom and dad are going to treat their children with respect, provide for them a safe and healthy environment, and model for them what it truly means to be human, and be able to provide the monitoring for them so that they're never too busy for their children. Their children are priority, and everything they do is built around creating a safe and healthy environment for their children. And so I truly want to thank all of you tonight for being here. And the time it just runs so fast anyway. And I had so much to say, so I would have to, continue this another night. Again, well, I'll continue. We're going to keep doing this series. And so tonight, I want to thank all of you for being here with us. Samantha, I really thank you for being here. Let me see. I can't, in my scrolling, I can't really see everybody. So I hope I don't miss anyone that's here tonight. Because for whatever reason, I just can't see who is on here. But I know even even the people who were there, somehow I touched something and it all disappeared. So I really can't figure it out. But anyway, all of you who tuned in tonight, I really want to appreciate. I think I saw, let's see, Amanta. Who else was here? Okay, see, Vinci Power was there. It's nice to have my brother here tonight. Who else is here? I apologize. I sincerely apologize that I can't see all the people who are here tonight. So please forgive me if I overlooked you. Just that I can't. Oh, Stephanie is here tonight, so thank you. Nervous. Who else is here? I can't see anyone else on mine. Say, I can't see anybody that's there. So, who else is there? Come on.
I think that's about.
Okay, good. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and we'll see you all again next week, same time, same place. Kamal, thank you so much for your patience. God bless.
Certainly, not a problem. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Davis. Again, it's always a pleasure having you. And like you said, we continue this series next Wednesday right here on WeFM. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Folks, you were listening to the Full and Abundant Life radio program, which comes your way each and every Wednesday from 9 until 10, hosted by Dr. Claudius Davis. And he continues to deal with the series, The Family and Childhood Development. God's willing to join him next Wednesday right here on WeFM from 9 until 10 as he continues this wonderful program right here on WeFM. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you